South Australia has a traditional history of manufacturing over the course of the last 50 years or so, which ultimately were, I suppose, dispersed a bit with the disappearance of the manufacturing industries of the automotive industries, white goods and those sorts of things. But it strikes me that there is a real future in South Australia, particularly in the northern suburbs of South Australia, to fill that void. And I'm really interested in hearing how it is that the government's grants process through the manufacturing strategy and prior plans have been used to push that along, that manufacturing rebirth, hopefully, in SA.
Look, it's fair to say that manufacturing in South Australia has had a patchy history ride since the closure of the automotive productions, but it's also been a positive story. There are now, according to our estimates, about 18,500 more jobs in South Australia than there were at the time of the Holden closure. The government has put a lot of money into the auto industry and supporting the transformation. We also know, and I can detail some of the projects there, programs there if you would like, but more importantly, the government in terms of manufacturing has also made a very strong and focused effort in both space, in the area of space, with $700 million going into the space program. There's been 2 space initiatives specifically for South Australia, the $6 million Space Discovery Centre, $6 million for the Mission Control Centre, the Space Headquarters, the Space Agency Headquarters is in Adelaide. The very strong focus on both space and defence industries in South Australia. So we expect some of a fair proportion of that $700 million for space to benefit and flow into South Australia. We don't have an exact estimate of that, obviously, but in the defence area, clearly the government has put a very large effort and emphasis on shipbuilding and shipbuilding capability, which has got a strong Australian industry capability development framework around it.
Just in relation to that manufacturing strategy and what you see as the priority areas in South Australia, you've mentioned the space industry and the space agency in particular, but there's been a lot of talk about advanced manufacturing generally, the trickle-down effects of the space and defence industries, and how you see that manufacturing strategy becoming a real force in South Australia's rebirth in manufacturing.
Thank you, Senator. So in relation to the Forward program, which is the manufacturing strategy, I guess the key thing to keep in mind about the approach that's being used for the funding streams is this co-design element. So there's a prioritisation and co-design. So they're listed in those priority sectors, some of the topics that are being talked about, defence, space and so on. They are very good clusters of capability in South Australia. So you would expect that they would, as Mr Wilson said, make a strong contribution to where the priority focus areas are as the industry-led road mapping continues. So in terms of that industry co-design process, basically how that works is the Minister appoints industry leaders who can work with the government on shaping where the priorities are within those broad sectors. And those appointments are just about finalised and that process will kick off soon. But in all those sectors, like defence and space, there are a large collection of existing materials, competitiveness plans, strategy documents and so on, which my team is pulling together at the moment. We are going to couple that material with leading experts from CSIRO and industry leaders to get in a room and to really sharpen up the clear deliverables that we want to get out of the manufacturing strategy, and also where we should target the funds. So keep in mind there are 4 significant funds in play. So there is the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund Part 2, which we've talked about before, that will be deployed quickly, so that will be open before the end of the year. We have then the Manufacturing Modernisation Initiative, which is the new fund with 3 streams, and again that will open in the new year, but it will be directed by this road mapping type exercise, and you would quite legitimately expect that there would be a number of significant applications from South Australia, including for the collaboration scheme around cluster development as that progresses in the next financial year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Senator.